You haven't seen sunlight in 4 days. Not because you're hiding, because this is where you live. 20 feet underground, in a tunnel so narrow your shoulders brush both walls when you breathe in air that smells like wet clay and gun oil and the particular staleness of oxygen that too many people have already used. Above you, the most heavily bombed piece of land in the history of aerial warfare. B-52s, Napalm, Agent Orange, 30 million craters in a stretch of jungle north of Saigon the Americans call the Iron Triangle. You are still here. This is Cu Chi. To understand this story fully, we should go from the beginning. You can hear this video while working on something, as your sleeping video, or whatever you feel comfortable with. Let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Boy Who Went Underground. You are 22 years old, and you are from Ben Suc, a village in Binh Duong Province, South Vietnam, 30 kilometers northwest of Saigon. Your father grew rice. His father grew rice. The land has been in your family in the way that land is in families in this part of the world, not as property exactly, but as identity. The field is not something your family owns. The field is something your family is. You joined the National Liberation Front in 1964, not because someone recruited you dramatically, because the Americans were bombing the villages, because the South Vietnamese government's strategic hamlet program had forcibly relocated your neighbors off land their ancestors farmed for 3 generations and placed them inside barbed wire compounds administered by men who did not know their names. Because when the choice is between 2 versions of your future and one of them is yours, the decision is not complicated even when it is dangerous. You received 3 weeks of military training in a base camp near the Cambodian border. Basic weapons handling, the AK-47, which you will learn to love for the same reason a carpenter loves a reliable hammer. Ambush tactics, mine placement, tunnel construction, and movement, which is not a supplementary skill in this war. It is the primary skill. It is the reason that what happens in Cu Chi happens the way it does. The Cu Chi tunnel network is not something that was built after the Americans arrived. The first tunnels were dug in the late 1940s during the war against the French, simple connecting passages between village shelters, built by hand with hose and bamboo baskets, hauled out cup by cup. By the time the Americans arrive in force in 1965, the network has been extended, deepened, fortified, and connected into a system that runs 250 kilometers through the earth beneath Cu Chi District. 3 levels. The first level sits 4 to 5 meters underground. The second level at 8 to 10 meters. The third level, the deepest, at 12 meters. Deep enough that the B-52 arc-light strikes, the carpet bombing runs that shake the earth for miles in every direction and leave craters 20 feet across and 15 feet deep, cannot reach you on the lower levels. The Americans bomb the surface of Cu Chi so comprehensively that the jungle is gone, the villages are gone, the topsoil is gone. The tunnels remain. You go underground in January 1966. Chapter 2. The Entrance. The entrance to the tunnel is a wooden trapdoor, 40 centimeters by 60 centimeters, covered with packed earth and leaves. It is invisible from a standing position. It is invisible from a kneeling position to someone who has not been shown exactly where to look. This is deliberate engineering. The trapdoors are designed to be undetectable by a man moving at patrol speed through jungle terrain, which is the speed at which American infantry patrols move when they enter Cu Chi District. The concealment is not camouflage in the military decoration sense. It is architecture. The door fits so precisely into the surrounding ground that it is the ground, to all available appearances, until the moment it isn't. You lower yourself through the opening feet first, reach up, pull the door shut above you, and descend into a darkness that is total. Not the darkness of a room with curtains drawn. The darkness of the complete absence of light, which the human eye cannot adjust to, because there is nothing to adjust to. You know the tunnel by touch. Every junction, every turn, every change in gradient, learned through repetition until the geography of the underground is as familiar as the geography of the village above was before the village above was destroyed. The tunnel on the first level is approximately 80 centimeters wide and 80 centimeters tall. You move through it in a crouched walk, back parallel to the ceiling, hands forward. Not because you need your hands for navigation. Because in the dark, the hands reach the wall junction a half second before your head does. And in a space this tight, a half second is the difference between navigation and a concussion. There are anti-intrusion measures built into the tunnel system at regular intervals. Underwater sections, the tunnel dips below a flooded passage that must be crossed by diving through, which is disorienting and terrifying for anyone who doesn't know it's there and where it ends. False branches that lead to dead ends, to concealed pits, to spaces designed to trap an intruder long enough for the tunnel's defenders to respond. The Americans call the soldiers they send into these tunnels tunnel rats. Volunteers, small men, armed with a pistol and a flashlight. Some of them are very brave. Brave enough to go in, not always knowledgeable enough to come out. The tunnel is your home. For them, it is the inside of a trap they walked into on purpose, which is a different kind of experience entirely. Chapter 3. The Daily Life Below. People live in the tunnels of Kuk Yi in the full sense of the word live. This is the part that the military histories abbreviate. They describe the tunnels as hiding places, as tactical infrastructure, as the explanation for why American search and destroy operations in Kuk Yi District produce so few enemy contacts relative to the evidence of enemy activity. They are not wrong. But the tunnels are also, for the people inside them, the place where ordinary life continues in whatever form ordinary life can take under extraordinary conditions. There are kitchens in the tunnel system, small chambers where cooking fires burn, but only at night, and only through chimneys engineered to disperse smoke horizontally through the topsoil rather than vertically into the air. Because smoke rising from the ground in an area that has been bombed into bare earth is immediately visible to aircraft, and visible means targeted, and targeted means dead. The chimney design takes smoke from the cooking fire and diffuses it through packed earth over a surface area large enough that it dissipates before it can be seen from the air. This is not the work of military engineers. This is the work of farmers and carpenters and schoolteachers who understood their land and applied that understanding to the problem of survival. The food is rice. Almost always rice. Sometimes supplemented by manioc, cassava, which can be grown in the degraded soil at the edges of the bomb zones, harvested quickly, and brought underground before an aircraft spots movement. Sometimes supplemented by whatever the supply network moving south from North Vietnam through the Ho Chi Minh Trail can deliver, which becomes less reliable as American bombing of the trail intensifies through 1966 and 1967. You eat twice a day when supply is good, once a day when it isn't. There are periods, especially during major American operations, when once a day is generous. The water supply comes from wells dug into the tunnel walls at points where the water table is accessible. The water is filtered through layers of fabric and sometimes treated with chemicals when chemicals are available. It is not safe by any standard a laboratory would apply. It is the water available, which makes the question of safety somewhat academic. You sleep on bamboo platforms raised slightly from the tunnel floor, which floods during the monsoon season. The water table rises, the packed earth absorbs what it can, and the remainder comes into the living spaces at ankle depth, then knee depth, until the rain stops and the water recedes, and the dampness that remains is simply the ambient condition of underground life in the tropics. The humidity in the tunnels is constant and total. Everything is wet. Your clothing is wet. Your sleeping mat is wet. Your rifle, which you maintain with the obsessive regularity of a man who understands that his rifle is the difference between his life and its absence, you clean and oil every single day, because the moisture in the tunnel air does to steel what time and water do to everything. It degrades it, corrodes it, introduces the possibility of failure at the worst possible moment. There is a clinic in the tunnel system, a chamber where a medical cadre trained in Hanoi or trained by someone trained in Hanoi or trained by whatever means were available and imperfect, treats the wounded and the sick. The sick are a significant problem. Malaria is endemic in the Kuk Yi area. The combination of poor nutrition, constant dampness, mosquitoes that enter the tunnel through the ventilation shafts, and the immunological stress of living underground for months degrades the health of the tunnel population in ways that combat itself doesn't always accomplish. You know men who survived American ambushes and Claymore mines and B-52 strikes and died from fever in a tunnel chamber 8 meters underground. There is also a meeting room, a chamber slightly larger than the living spaces, where the political cadre conducts sessions, education, ideology, the news from the wider war filtered through the communication channels that connect Cu Chi to the command structure above ground and to Hanoi above that. You attend these sessions not with the enthusiasm the cadre would prefer, and not with the cynicism that exhaustion sometimes produces. You attend them with the pragmatic attention of a man who understands that the war is not only fought with rifles and tunnels, it is fought with will. And will requires maintenance, and the sessions are the maintenance. Chapter 4. The Sounds of the Surface. You learn to read the surface war by sound. This is not a skill anyone teaches you formally. It arrives through experience, the way all real skills arrive, through repetition and the feedback loop of being wrong until you are right. The sound of artillery is a distant percussion that arrives in the tunnel as vibration before it arrives as sound. You feel it in your feet, in your back against the tunnel wall. The vibration pattern tells you approximately where the impact point is relative to your position. Near vibrations sharp and localized, distant vibrations long and rolling. You learn to distinguish outgoing from incoming, American from North Vietnamese, 105 memo from 155 memo, the rhythm of a fire mission from the irregular pattern of counter-battery fire. The sound of B-52 arc light strikes is something else entirely. The B-52s fly at 30,000 feet, high enough that they are inaudible from the ground until the bombs are already falling, which means the first indication of an arc light strike is not a sound at all. It is the ground moving. The earth moves in a wave, like water, which the earth is not supposed to do, and the tunnel flexes with it, and the timber supports groan, and loose soil falls from the ceiling in a steady rain of particles, and somewhere in the tunnel network a section collapses, which you know because the air pressure in the tunnel system changes when a section collapses. You feel it as a sudden pressure change in your ears, like descending rapidly in an aircraft. After a major arc light strike, you spend the next several hours assessing and repairing. The tunnel network requires constant maintenance under normal conditions. After a B-52 strike, the maintenance is emergency work, shoring up compromised sections, digging around collapses to restore connections, checking every ventilation shaft for blockage. The sound of American infantry is the sound you are most attentive to. American soldiers in the jungle make noise that Vietnamese soldiers learn to identify at significant distances. The equipment, the canteens, the belt gear, the M16 ammunition creates a specific acoustic signature when moving through undergrowth. The radio handsets produce a distinctive static when the operator adjusts the frequency. The boots on the defoliated soil around Cu Chi, where the vegetation has been stripped by herbicide and bombing, produce a particular sound against bare earth that is different from the sound of bare feet or the rubber sandals that the tunnel fighters wear. When American infantry is within 200 meters above ground, you go completely still underground. All movement stops. No cooking fire. No conversation above a whisper. The tunnel becomes something between a hiding place and a held breath, everyone inside it contributing to a collective stillness that is itself a form of action, a performance of absence that the searchers above cannot penetrate. You listen to American soldiers walking over your head. Sometimes they stop. Sometimes a man stands directly above your position, his weight transmitted through 20 feet of earth as a subtle compression you would not be able to describe to someone who had not felt it. You look at the ceiling of the tunnel and you wait. They move on. Chapter 5. Operation Crimp, A.N.D. The Tunnel Rats. January 1966. The Americans launch Operation Crimp. 8,000 soldiers, elements of the 1st Infantry Division and the 173rd Airborne Brigade, descend on Cu Chi District in the largest American operation of the war to that date. The objective is to find and destroy the headquarters of the Military Region 4 Command, which American intelligence has identified as operating from within the Cu Chi tunnel network. They land in fields, they move through what remains of the jungle, they find trapdoors. The first American soldiers who go into the tunnels are not tunnel rats, the specialized volunteers who will be formalized later. They are regular infantrymen doing what infantry does, which is clearing a space that might contain a threat. They go in with flashlights and pistols, and in some cases, just with their rifles, which is too wide to use effectively in a tunnel 80 centimeters across. What happens underground during crimp is not a battle in the conventional sense. There are no lines, no formations, no artillery support, no air support. There are two men in a tunnel and a darkness and a space so confined that the muzzle flash from a pistol shot is blinding, and the sound of it in an enclosed earthen chamber is something that bypasses the ears and becomes instead a full-body physical event. The tunnel fighters know where they are. The Americans do not. This is the entirety of the tactical situation. You are not in the section of the tunnel where the Americans enter. You know they are inside the system because the sound carries through the earth differently than surface sounds. Closer, more intimate. The impact of boots on packed earth at your level rather than filtering down from above. You move to a defensive position, a chamber with an angled entrance that prevents a direct shot from the tunnel approach. And you wait with your rifle, and you listen. The Americans withdraw after 2 days. They do not find the regional command headquarters. They find tunnels, weapons caches, printing equipment, a field hospital, a kitchen. They map what they can reach and destroy what they can destroy. They do not find the third level, which is where the command functions during major American operations, where the earth above is thick enough and the planning careful enough that the surface war becomes something distant and theoretical. Operation Crimp takes the tunnels seriously for the first time. It does not solve the problem the tunnels represent. That problem does not have a military solution, which the war will spend the next 9 years demonstrating. Chapter 6. The weight of it. There are things about living underground that the tactical summaries don't contain. The darkness is the first thing. Not the inconvenience of darkness, but the psychological weight of it. Human beings are visual animals. The brain requires visual input to process the environment, to feel safe, to maintain the sense of spatial orientation that underpins the sense of self. In total darkness, for extended periods, the brain begins to manufacture input. You see shapes that aren't there, movement in your peripheral vision, shadows without source. This is not a malfunction. This is the brain doing its job in a context where its tools have nothing to work with. You manage this with discipline. With the small oil lamps that burn a few hours each day in the living chambers, a light so modest it would be inadequate to read by, but sufficient to orient the visual system, to remind the brain that the world has shape, and that the shape is stable. The confinement is the second thing. Not just physical confinement, the inability to stand fully upright, to extend your arms, to move at any speed above a careful crouch, but the compression of the world to a space you can cross in 4 steps. Above ground, even in the destroyed landscape of Kuchi district, the world has a horizon. Underground, the world ends at the wall. You dream about the surface. Not about the war, about the surface itself, open air, the sky, rain falling from above rather than seeping through from below, the feeling of ground that does not press back from all sides. These dreams are not nostalgic exactly. They are the brain's way of confirming that the surface is still real, and that you are temporarily displaced from it rather than permanently erased from the world of open air. The third thing is the waiting. The Kuchi tunnel fighters spend a substantial portion of their time not fighting, not preparing to fight, not moving, simply existing underground in conditions that are uncomfortable and dangerous and unrelenting, waiting for the operational moment that justifies the existence. During major American sweeps, the waiting lasts for days. You cannot move, cannot make significant noise, cannot cook, cannot do anything that might reveal the position. You sit in the dark and you exist as quietly as possible, and you wait for the surface to become navigable again. This is the experience that shapes a person in ways that combat itself sometimes doesn't. Combat is intense and brief. The waiting is total and long. The human capacity for endurance is tested more completely by the waiting than by the fighting, because the fighting has an endpoint, it either ends or it ends you, and the waiting has only the promise of an endpoint that may or may not arrive on any particular day. The fighters who last in the tunnels are not necessarily the strongest or the most skilled. They are the ones who can inhabit the waiting, who can sit in a dark chamber 80 centimeters wide with the sound of American soldiers above them and the smell of wet earth and gun oil and the awareness that the tunnel may collapse or flood or be discovered at any moment, and remain functional, remain disciplined, remain human. Chapter 7. The Guerrilla War Above. The tunnels are not passive infrastructure. They are the base from which the Cu Chi fighters conduct the surface war. And the surface war in Cu Chi District is unlike conventional military operations at almost every level. You emerge at night. This is the rhythm of the tunnel war. Days spent underground, nights spent above ground placing mines and booby traps, ambushing supply convoys, attacking fire support bases at the perimeter, moving supplies through the cleared corridors before dawn, then back underground before the American air assets have enough light to operate. The booby trap campaign in Cu Chi is documented in American after-action reports in a way that communicates, with the flat language of military bureaucracy, the scale of its effectiveness. Punji stakes, sharpened bamboo in concealed pits, sometimes treated with feces to cause infection. Toe popper mines, small pressure-activated devices buried at ankle depth. Claymore-style command detonated mines positioned along the routes that American patrols use, learned by observation over weeks and months. The Bouncing Betty, an anti-personnel mine that launches a secondary charge to waist height before detonation, designed to maximize casualties in a patrol formation. 11% of American casualties in Vietnam are attributed to booby traps and mines. In Cu Chi District, that percentage is higher. The 25th Infantry Division, based at Cu Chi Base Camp, spends years fighting an enemy that cannot be fixed, cannot be targeted by artillery with precision, cannot be engaged by air power without destroying the infrastructure they need to remain, and losing men every week to devices in the ground, placed by hands they never see, guided by knowledge of the terrain that no briefing document can replicate. You know every trail in this district. You know every canal, every tree line, every the Americans have worn into the defoliated earth by patrol repetition. You know them because you grew up in them, and because after 2 years of war, you know them the way a man knows the inside of his own home, without thinking, by the specific gravity of familiarity. The Americans are technically superior in almost every measurable dimension: firepower, air support, logistics, medical evacuation, communication. They can put more steel on a target faster than any army in history. The target is the problem. The target is underneath them. The target is the ground they're standing on. The target is the darkness below the darkness. And the men inside it know something the American doctrine of firepower and mobility cannot account for. They are not going anywhere. This is their land. This is their province. This is the soil their fathers and their fathers' fathers cultivated and are buried in. They will wait as long as the waiting takes. Chapter 8. What the bombs cannot reach. The Americans attempt multiple solutions to the tunnel problem. Chemical defoliants, Agent Orange, and other herbicides strip the jungle canopy above Cu Chi, removing concealment for tunnel entrances and movement above ground. The tunnel network itself is unaffected. The defoliation also destroys the agricultural capacity of the region for years, which affects the civilian population and the tunnel fighters in equal measure. If your food comes from the land and the land has been poisoned, the shortage is not discriminating. Tunnel destruction teams, engineers with explosives, enter sections of the network and blow them. The explosions collapse the targeted section. The tunnel network routes around the collapsed section within days. 250 kilometers of hand-dug earth has a redundancy that no explosive campaign of practical scale can exhaust. Seize gas, tear gas, introduced into the tunnel system through ventilation shafts and tunnel entrances. Effective against unprotected fighters in enclosed spaces. The Cu Chi tunnel fighters produce gas masks, improvised, made from locally available materials, crude by industrial standards, sufficient for the purpose. They issue them to every person in the tunnel system and drill the usage until it is automatic. Tunnel rats, the volunteer soldiers who enter the tunnels with pistols and flashlights. effective at locating and destroying specific installations when they find them, at enormous personal risk. Unable to penetrate the full network because the network is too large and too well defended at its key nodes. Tunnel sealing, pouring concrete or foam into known tunnel entrances to block access. The tunnels have more entrances than can be found, and any blocked entrance is excavated from below within a day. None of it works comprehensively. All of it extracts cost. The network survives. Chapter 9, The Tet Offensive. January 30th, 1968. The Lunar New Year. Tet. For months, the Kuki tunnel system functions as part of the preparation for what will become the largest coordinated military operation of the war. Simultaneous attacks on more than 100 South Vietnamese cities and towns, timed to the Tet holiday when American and South Vietnamese forces are at reduced readiness. The staging for the Kuki sector moves through the tunnel network. Weapons, ammunition, fighters positioning for movement to Saigon, which is 30 kilometers south. The logistics of Tet, the movement of tens of thousands of fighters into position in urban areas without triggering the American intelligence network, run through the underground infrastructure that the B-52s and the tunnel rats and the defoliants have been trying to destroy for 3 years. The attacks begin at 0300, Saigon, Hue, Da Nang. Nha Trang, 70 cities. The American embassy in Saigon is breached. The ancient citadel of Hue is occupied and held for 26 days. The image of the Vietcong flag flying from the walls of Hue, broadcast on American television, does something to the American domestic understanding of the war that 3 years of briefings and progress reports and kill ratios have constructed. It collapses it. Militarily, Tet is a catastrophe for the NLF. The popular uprising the offensive is designed to trigger does not occur. The anticipated defections from the South Vietnamese military do not materialize. The fighters who enter the cities take devastating casualties. The NLF loses an estimated 45,000 dead in the Tet offensive and its aftermath. In Kuki district, the fighters who stage through the tunnel system and advance to their objectives are largely killed. A generation of experienced fighters, the men who built the tunnel network, who fought the French, who survived the first 3 years against the Americans, are gone. The tunnels survive. Politically, Tet changes the war. The American domestic opposition, which has been building since 1966, reaches a threshold. Walter Cronkite, the CBS News anchor, the most trusted man in American television, broadcasts from Vietnam after Tet and says, in language rare for a television journalist in 1968, that the war is a stalemate and that negotiation is the only remaining option. President Johnson watches the broadcast and reportedly says that if he has lost Cronkite, he has lost Middle America. Johnson does not seek re-election. The political architecture of the American war begins its long unraveling. You are in the tunnel when the offensive begins. You are in the tunnel when it ends. Chapter 10. What Remains. The Paris Peace Accords are signed on January 27, 1973. American combat forces withdraw. The war between North and South Vietnam continues without American ground troops for 2 more years. Saigon falls on April 30th, 1975. The war ends. The Kuki district in 1975 is not a district in any inhabitable sense. The American military has dropped more explosives on Vietnam per square kilometer than on any other country in the history of aerial bombardment, a calculation that includes both world wars. The Kuki area specifically, as the base of the tunnel network, has received concentrated attention from every weapon system available to the American military for 9 years. The land is cratered, defoliated, chemically contaminated. The villages are gone. The agricultural infrastructure, the paddies, the irrigation channels, the tree cover is gone. What remains is a landscape that looks, in the aerial photographs of the period, like the surface of the moon. The tunnels remain. Of the thousands of people who lived and fought in the Kuki tunnel system between the late 1940s and 1975, a fraction survive. The NLF district of Kuki enters the war with a population of approximately 16,000 civilians and fighters. By the end, the surviving population of the underground is numbered in hundreds. The tunnel system itself becomes, after the war, a memorial and a museum, sections preserved, widened slightly for tourist access. The kitchen and the clinic and the meeting rooms restored to approximate representation. Visitors descend through trapdoors and crouch through the passages and surface again into the open air of a country at peace, and they stand in the light and breathe, and some of them understand something about what it meant, and all of them are grateful for the light. What it actually was. It was darkness and damp and the smell of sulfur from the cooking fires and the particular staleness of air that circulates through packed earth. It was the sound of American boots on the ground above your head, and the discipline of absolute stillness, and the arithmetic of what happens if the stillness fails. It was rice and fever, and a rifle maintained with religious regularity in conditions hostile to every metal surface. It was waiting, more waiting than fighting. Longer periods of waiting than most people experience in their entire lives compressed into years in a space 80 centimeters wide. It was knowing this land in your blood, knowing the trail, the canal, the tree line, the specific way the soil of Cu Chi district compresses underfoot after rain, and using that knowledge as the primary strategic asset in a war against the most powerful military in the world. It was 250 kilometers of hand-dug earth. It was the thing that the B-52s couldn't find and the defoliants couldn't reach, and the tunnel rats couldn't fully penetrate, and the Paris Peace Accords couldn't make irrelevant. It was home. Underground, bombed, flooded, dark, rat-infested, fever-ridden, and home. The people who lived in it were not superhuman. They were farmers and teachers and carpenters and students who made a calculation about what their land was worth and what they were willing to endure to keep it. They endured everything, and the tunnels are still there. If you've made it this far, drop a comment. Tell me what part hit different. Hit the like button right now, subscribe, because we upload every single day and you don't want to miss what's coming next. The surface never broke them. That was always the point.